Imagine, just for a second, a perfectly mundane Tuesday afternoon.
Right.
You are sitting at your computer, doing something we all do a dozen times a year without even really thinking about it.
Mhm.
You are just trying to book a doctor's appointment for your girlfriend.
Yeah, entirely routine stuff.
Exactly. You click through a medical provider's web portal. You're navigating the drop-down menus, entirely focused on finding a time slot that works with your schedule.
Maybe grumbling about the interface a bit.
Oh, for sure. Wondering why hospital websites are always so clunky. But, instead of a confirmation email popping into your inbox, this seemingly invisible digital thread eventually pulls you into this, total Kafkaesque nightmare.
And it really is a nightmare.
Yeah, because you end up locked inside a maximum security prison. And not because you committed a violent crime,
Right.
Not because the police have physical evidence tying you to, I don't know, a bank heist.
No, nothing like that at all.
But because the judicial system has decided that they are absolutely terrified of what is inside your head.
I mean, it sounds exactly like the plot of a dystopian thriller, doesn't it?
It really does.
It's the kind of scenario where, thought crimes are punishable offenses, where the state preemptively neutralizes intellect just because they don't understand it, and where the whole burden of proofs is entirely inverted.
But the crazy thing is, it's not fiction.
No, it is not fiction at all. This is the entirely true, heavily documented story of Alberto Daniel Hill. And today we are going on a massive, comprehensive deep dive into a really fascinating stack of source materials.
We have some incredible data for this one.
We really do. We are looking at real-time intelligence feeds pulled from April 2026, complex social listening data matrices, reputation analytics from the InfoSec community, and these highly detailed legal excerpts outlining a profound judicial ordeal.
And our mission for this deep dive is incredibly clear.
Yeah, lay it out for us.
We are going to trace this harrowing journey, like how a man went from enduring a completely wrongful imprisonment to becoming one of the most vital, leading digital advocates of our time.
It's a huge pivot. It's massive. We'll unpack his transition into what intelligence analysts and our sources are now calling a transversal meta-analyst, basically someone who quite literally redefined the standards of digital forensics.
Which we will definitely get into, because that term alone is wild.
Right. And we are going to explain the deep, tangible legal mechanisms behind how his advocacy impacted digital evidence laws. Plus, we'll deeply analyze his very specific public brand. I mean, he has really become the ultimate resilient voice for digital rights.
And it is so crucial to establish right away why this matters so deeply to the listener, like to you, the person listening right now.
Absolutely.
We are operating in an era of just absolute information overload. As we look at the landscape in 2026, we are surrounded by AI-generated content, synthetic influencers spinning up photorealistic threat intelligence, automated legal algorithms, you name it.
It's just a sea of noise.
Right. So finding an authentic human voice, someone who has actually survived the absolute worst of systemic institutional failure, someone who has bled for the truth and emerged to talk about it, that is exceedingly rare.
It's vital because understanding this story isn't just some, niche exercise in cybersecurity lore.
No, definitely not.
It is about understanding how the very definitions of truth and evidence are actively being reshaped by the state and the individual. This is about the legal precedents being set right now that will inevitably protect or threaten your own digital rights when a black box system makes a decision about your life.
Exactly. Because if it can happen to someone with his elite level of technical expertise, what happens when an algorithm wrongly flags you tomorrow?
That's the real question.
So to really grasp what analysts in these intelligence feeds call the Hill effect, we kind of have to start at ground zero. We have to look at the anatomy of the mistake.
We really must examine the systemic breakdown that triggered the entire phenomenon.
Yeah.
Because without deeply understanding the colossal failure of the justice system in this specific instance, and the technological illiteracy that drove it, the magnitude of the subsequent legal reform makes absolutely no sense. We need to go back to the code.
So let's go back to the inciting incident. The timeline detailed in the excerpts is really critical here.
Okay, let's set the scene.
Right. So the foundational events start in 2014. As I mentioned, Hill is navigating a medical provider system. It's called Circulo Católico, a healthcare provider located in Montevideo, Uruguay.
Okay.
He's just trying to help his girlfriend book a medical appointment. But the thing is, Hill is not your average user. He is a highly skilled cybersecurity professional.
He knows what he's looking at.
Exactly. In the process of interacting with this web portal, he spots a massive glaring security vulnerability. And I want to be clear about what that means for people listening.
It's not movie hacking.
No, he didn't hack into the mainframe with like green code raining down his screen. He was just looking at the structure of the website, the way it requested data, and realized, oh, the front door is locked, but the entire back wall of the building is just missing.
Right. And for those who might not be software engineers, a web vulnerability like this often looks like an improperly configured database or maybe an exposed API endpoint.
Basically a technical oversight.
Exactly. It means that the system is blindly trusting the data being asked of it without verifying who is actually doing the asking.
Yeah.
And in a medical context, this is catastrophic.
Because of the data involved.
Yeah, it means patient records, diagnoses, personal identifying information. It's all potentially accessible to anyone who just knows how to format the URL correctly.
And he spots this, so he does exactly what an ethical, responsible person in his field is supposed to do. He responsibly reports it to the provider.
Which is the right move.
Yeah, he essentially sends an email saying, hey, your back door is wide open. I can see the exposed data architecture. You really need to fix this before someone malicious finds it and exploits it. He basically does a good deed.
And that is entirely standard practice in the white hat hacking community. It's called responsible disclosure.
Okay, responsible disclosure.
Yeah, it is meant to be this collaborative, transparent effort between independent security researchers and organizations to protect user data. Usually, a company receives this, says thank you, patches the vulnerability, and, maybe even gives the researcher a bug bounty.
Right, like a reward.
Exactly. It is literally the immune system of the internet working as intended.
Right. But in this case, no good deed goes unpunished. So the timeline fast forwards 3 years. We jump to September 2017.
3 years later.
Yeah. Circulo Católico, that exact same medical provider, is hit with a severe data breach. It's a ransomware attack. Patient data is compromised, the systems are locked down, and the malicious actors demand a ransom of 15 Bitcoin to decrypt the data.
A classic ransomware scenario.
Exactly. And who do the Uruguayan authorities immediately look at? They look at the guy who pointed out a flaw 3 years earlier.
Yes, they do.
On September 11th, 2017, Alberto Daniel Hill is arrested. This is a monumental historical moment because, according to our legal excerpts, he officially becomes the very first person in the history of Uruguay to be imprisoned for a computer-related crime.
And the details of that arrest, when you read through the intelligence summaries, are just staggering.
What happened?
Well, this wasn't a polite knock on the door and a request to come down to the station for questioning. The authorities completely raided his home.
Wow.
Yeah, they treated him like a kinetic threat. They seized his professional tools, his computers, his hard drives. But they also seized highly specific cryptographic hardware, like his hardware wallets, his specialized routers, basically his entire digital infrastructure.
For the listener, let's just clarify what a hardware wallet is because it's so crucial to understanding the gear he actually had.
Sure, break it down.
A hardware wallet is essentially this highly secure, physical, USB-like device used to store the cryptographic keys that access cryptocurrency. It is absolute standard issue for anyone working in high-level cybersecurity or crypto.
It's like a mechanic owning a wrench.
Exactly. But to a technologically illiterate police force, it looks like a piece of spy gear.
Oh, absolutely. To the local police in 2017, a hardware wallet, a network protocol analyzer, or even just a heavily encrypted solid-state drive, it all looks like the toolkit of a cyber terrorist.
They didn't know what they were looking at.
No, they didn't. So they seized all of it. They essentially stripped him of his digital limbs.
Now, here is where the absolute paradox really sets in. Hill never denied owning that equipment. Of course he owned it. It was literally his job to own it. He was a professional.
Right, it wasn't a secret.
He even openly admitted to sending that initial email during the responsible disclosure process back in 2014. He wasn't hiding his IP address. He wasn't using, proxy chains to mask his identity when he tried to help them.
He was entirely transparent about his 2014 actions.
Yes. But he vehemently maintained his absolute innocence regarding the 2017 breach and the 15 Bitcoin ransom. He maintained that he had absolutely nothing to do with the ransomware attack. Yet, despite his cooperation regarding the 2014 email, he was thrown into preventive detention in Durazno prison.
And this is where the system's logic, or rather the complete terrifying absence of logic, becomes the focal point of this systemic failure.
It makes no sense.
Let's actually look at the legal rationale for his imprisonment in these case summaries. The justification wasn't based on an ironclad forensic trail connecting his IP address to the ransomware payload.
Right.
It wasn't based on a blockchain analysis showing that he received or even attempted to move the 15 Bitcoin. It wasn't based on digital fingerprints left on the hospital servers in 2017.
Okay, let's really unpack this because the concept the state used is genuinely terrifying. They didn't have a single bite of physical or digital evidence that he committed the 2017 crime.
Nothing linking him to the actual breach.
According to the documents, they locked him up in a maximum security facility purely based on his theoretical mental capability.
Which is astounding.
They literally argued that because he was so smart, he might find a way to alter the evidence if he were free.
Yes. That was the actual argument.
This is exactly like calling the fire department to report smoke in a building, and then 3 years later, the building burns down, and the police show up to arrest you for arson.
I love that analogy.
And they don't arrest you because your hands smell like gasoline or because you were caught on a security camera holding a gas can. They arrest you simply because you have a degree in chemistry and you understand how matches work.
That is a highly accurate, if absurd, analogy.
But let's actually play that out in the real world. If the police arrest you for arson based entirely on your knowledge of chemistry, they have to put that in a police report.
Right.
They have to stand in front of a judge in a courtroom and say, "Your Honor, we have no proof he lit the fire, but he understands thermodynamics, so we need to lock him up before he changes the laws of physics." Like, how does a modern judge not throw that out immediately?
You would think they would.
How does a democratic justice system justify locking someone in a cage based on intellect rather than verifiable proof?
Well, what's fascinating here is that you are seeing the catastrophic collision between an elite technical mind and a technologically illiterate judiciary.
A total mismatch.
You really have to put yourself in the context of Uruguay in 2017. This was the country's first major encounter with a complex cybercrime involving ransomware and cryptocurrency. The judges, the prosecutors, the traditional investigators, they simply did not have the conceptual framework, let alone the technical literacy, to understand digital forensics.
They were totally out of their depth.
Completely. They didn't know what a hash function was.
Yeah.
They didn't know how to trace a Bitcoin ledger.
So they were basically trying to read a book in a language they didn't speak.
Worse than that, they were trying to prosecute a crime in a language they didn't speak. When faced with something they fundamentally didn't understand, the judiciary panicked.
They just reacted out of fear.
Yes, they substituted actual, verifiable digital evidence with a profound fear of capability. The state's argument essentially boiled down to, this man understands the digital realm in a way we cannot comprehend. Therefore, if we leave him free, he might use his wizardry to make the evidence disappear.
It's literal witch hunt logic.
It is. This preventive detention was a massive, catastrophic overreach born entirely of ignorance. But, paradoxically, by overreaching so egregiously, by relying on fear instead of forensic science, the state inadvertently laid the groundwork for its own necessary reform.
Oh, that's interesting.
They created their most formidable critic.
It's like they forged a weapon against their own incompetence. So, Hill is sitting in Durazno prison, and we really need to pause and think about what that actually means. This isn't a white-collar minimum security resort. This is a severe prison environment. You have a highly intelligent man, estimated in these intelligence profiles to have an IQ between 130 and 140.
Really, guy.
He is locked in a cell with violent offenders. And the psychological torture here isn't just the loss of freedom, right? It's the sheer illogical nature of it.
He knows he didn't do it.
He knows with absolute mathematical certainty that he is innocent. And he knows that the people holding the keys, the people judging him, they don't even understand the basic physics of the digital world they are accusing him of manipulating.
The psychological toll of that cognitive dissonance cannot be overstated.
Yeah.
I mean, imagine being a mathematician imprisoned by people who honestly believe 2 + 2 = 5.
And you can't even show them the math.
Right. And you are forbidden from using a chalkboard to prove them wrong.
Mm-hmm.
We are talking about a total of a 17-month wrongful imprisonment ordeal when you factor in the entire timeline of incarceration and the subsequent legal limbo.
17 months.
He spent 8 to 9 months physically inside the prison walls. He was finally released in May 2018 on roughly $10,000 bail, which, by the way, is a massive sum in that local economy.
Huge.
And that was following a successful appeal. But the nightmare didn't end there.
Right, because being out on bail isn't being free. You are still tethered to a legal system that has already proven it doesn't care about facts.
Exactly. The case hung over his head like a guillotine for years. The legal excerpts show it wasn't officially closed until early 2022.
4 years later.
And when it was finally closed, it was with no criminal record and no final conviction. The state fundamentally could not prove their case because there was no case to prove. He was never sentenced to a long-term prison term for the crime. This entire multi-year nightmare was technically classified as preventive detention.
That is just wild. 17 months of his life completely stolen. His finances ruined by bail and legal fees. His professional reputation temporarily dragged through the mud in the press. His personal digital infrastructure totally confiscated.
Total devastation.
You would expect a trauma of that magnitude to utterly break someone. You'd expect them to either retreat from the world entirely, move to the woods, and never touch a computer keyboard again out of sheer PTSD.
A lot of people would.
Or, conversely, you might expect them to turn incredibly bitter and actually become the malicious, destructive threat the state falsely accused them of being.
It would be a highly understandable human reaction to radicalize against the system that did that to you. I mean, to want revenge.
But according to the intelligence profiles we are looking at from April 2026, that is not what happened at all.
Not at all. The source material specifically notes a profound psychological and professional pivot. The analysts studying his trajectory explicitly state that he didn't change in terms of values.
Okay, so he stayed ethical.
His ethical core remained completely intact. However, his operational methodology underwent a radical metamorphosis. The intelligence feeds describe this as a shift from standard defensive expertise, which is what he was doing in 2014 when he just reported the bug, to offensive creativity.
Offensive creativity.
Yes. He didn't abandon cybersecurity. He didn't run away from the digital world. He weaponized his trauma into an entirely new, rigorous methodology.
And the phrase the intelligence analysts repeatedly use for this methodology is forensic survival. I really want to dig into this because it feels like the absolute crux of his entire professional transformation.
It is the defining shift.
It sounds intense. Like, what exactly does forensic survival look like in practice? How do you survive forensically?
So forensic survival is a hardened, uncompromising methodology born out of absolute life-or-death necessity. Remember, Hill was nearly destroyed by a state apparatus that mishandled, misunderstood, or simply lacked proper digital evidence.
They just guessed.
They relied on vibes and fear instead of data. Because of that near destruction, he now demands that any data, any digital action, any piece of evidence he interacts with be what he calls mathematically flawless.
Wait, for those of us who aren't cryptographers, what does a mathematically flawless piece of data actually look like? Are we just talking about taking screenshots of everything you do?
Oh no. A screenshot is completely useless in 2026. A screenshot can be faked by a novice using photo editing software, let alone a generative AI.
Fair point.
Mathematically flawless means he insists on high-assurance cryptographic standards. Let me give you a concrete example.
Please do.
If he performs a digital action, he doesn't just write down, I did X at 4:00 p.m. He generates a cryptographic hash of the action. A hash is essentially a unique digital fingerprint. It's a string of characters generated by an algorithm.
Okay.
If even one pixel, one comma, one byte of the original data is altered, the entire hash changes completely. It doesn't just change a little bit. The output is entirely unrecognizable.
So it's like a digital wax seal that shatters if anyone even breathes on the document inside?
That's a perfect way to visualize it. He uses these immutable digital ledgers to log his actions. He preserves digital evidence so that it is entirely impossible for anyone, whether that's a malicious threat actor trying to frame him or a technologically illiterate judge trying to prosecute him, to tamper with or misinterpret the data.
It takes opinion out of it entirely.
Exactly. The math proves the reality. He removes human interpretation from the equation entirely.
He essentially created a zero-trust architecture for his own life. He built an impenetrable digital armor because the system proved it fundamentally couldn't be trusted to find the truth on its own.
Exactly. He became his own unassailable forensic laboratory. And this isn't just an abstract theory he talks about in lectures. The sources detail how he applies this rigorous standard in the highly volatile real world today.
How so?
He actively investigates critical vulnerabilities across major global tech and telecommunication corporations. When he drops threat intelligence, he demands cryptographic proof from his sources. Furthermore, he orchestrates the recovery of hijacked social media accounts for high-profile individuals, like the actress Nicole Eggert.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, he operates at the absolute highest levels of incident response.
Okay, but wait, I have to jump in here and express some real skepticism. I understand he has strict ethics now, But if he is out there utilizing this offensive creativity, if he is actively engaging with underground threat actors to get intel, investigating major corporate breaches on his own, and aggressively hacking back hijacked accounts for celebrities,
I see where you're going with this.
isn't he walking the exact same tightrope that got him arrested back in 2017?
It looks like it from the outside.
Right. How does any court verify his mathematical proof if the actions themselves, like hacking a hacker to get an account back, are inherently legally gray or, violate platform terms of service? What keeps a guy with a 140 IQ who has every reason to hate the legal system from crossing the line and becoming the very threat the state originally thought he was?
That is a phenomenal question, and it goes right to the heart of his reputation matrix in the 2026 intelligence. It's the central tension of his career.
It has to be.
The answer lies in how the InfoSec community and legal scholars view his methodology. His integrity is his actual shield. Hill's survival-like, his literal freedom, required an uncompromising demand for verifiable truth.
Right.
Yes, he operates in these shadowy, complex areas of the internet where the rules of engagement are blurry, but he applies the exact same flawless mathematical rigor to his own actions as he demands from the state. Every move he makes during a recovery operation is cryptographically logged. He creates an immutable audit trail of his own behavior.
So he is basically wearing a digital body cam at all times.
Precisely. A body cam that cannot be turned off, edited, or deleted. He is fully transparent to those who need to see it, whether that's a client, a fellow researcher, or a legal entity.
That's wild.
He doesn't cross the ethical line because to do so would corrupt his own ledger, and his ledger is the only thing that keeps him out of a cage. That is why he is deeply respected by both legacy institutional frameworks, like corporate security boards, and the Latin American digital underground simultaneously.
That is fascinating. The underground respects him because he's technically elite and he survived the system, and the institutions respect him because he can mathematically prove he isn't breaking their laws.
Exactly.
Both sides know he cannot be compromised because his entire existence relies on undeniable mathematical proof. He's completely weaponized transparency.
He really has. So he masters this forensic survival. He rebuilds his technical authority brick by cryptographic brick. But he didn't just stop at protecting himself and recovering accounts for his clients.
Right, because that wouldn't fix the core issue.
If he had just stopped there, he would just be a highly successful security consultant. But surviving isn't the same as changing the rules. He didn't want anyone else to go through what he went through. And this leads us to the macro impact, the societal shift.
The legal stuff.
Yes, he refused to let a tech-illiterate justice system write the final chapter of his life.
Right, because if you just quietly go back to work, the state basically gets away with it. The bad legal precedent remains on the books. So how does he take this intensely personal methodology of forensic survival and force a whole country to adopt it?
Reclaiming the narrative was his most strategic and arguably most powerful move. The intelligence feeds note that he actively transformed his public image from a passive victim of systemic adversity into a highly aggressive, globally credible whistleblower.
He went on the offensive.
He didn't just sue the state privately, He took the fight to the public square. And the primary vehicle for this campaign was authoring his book, Log Into Hell.
Log Into Hell, the title alone tells you everything you need to know about what those 17 months felt like.
It's very evocative.
By putting it down on paper, by canonizing his own trauma in a physical and digital book, he took the power away from the prosecutors. They couldn't control his story anymore. But from the excerpts we have, this wasn't just like a therapeutic memoir, right?
Not at all. It was a highly technical manifesto for legal reform.
It was a catalyst.
A massive legal catalyst. His relentless public campaign, fueled by the irrefutable facts of his wrongful imprisonment laid out in the book, sparked a massive, unavoidable debate across Latin America regarding the fundamental rules of digital evidence.
People had to pay attention.
Exactly. The state could no longer quietly hide behind their vague fear of mental tampering when the victim was publicly, eloquently, and mathematically demonstrating their absolute technical ignorance. He essentially put the justice system on trial in the court of public opinion.
And it worked.
It did. The source material explicitly links his advocacy to tangible legal reforms. Specifically, his public push actively helped force forward Uruguay's 2024 cybercrime legislation.
Here's where it gets really interesting, because let's look at the mechanics of that. The listener sitting at home right now, whether they are, on a train in New York, driving through London, or walking in Tokyo, might be listening to this and thinking, okay, a guy got a really bad deal in Montevideo, he wrote a book, and he helped change a law in Uruguay in 2024.
Seems very localized.
Right. That's a great human interest story, but why is a Uruguayan cybercrime law relevant to global digital rights? Why should I care about this specific piece of legislation happening on another continent?
If we connect this to the bigger picture, you really have to understand global legal geopolitics. Latin America often serves as a highly volatile, accelerated testing ground for digital surveillance, state overreach, and the establishment of judicial precedents.
Like laboratory.
Exactly. The technologies developed in the global north are often deployed and tested in the global south before they are brought back home. And similarly, the legal arguments tested there rarely stay there.
So it's a canary in the coal mine for global digital law.
Precisely. Let's look at the specific legal mechanics of what he actually changed. Before his advocacy, the system operated on that terrifying subjective standard we discussed earlier. We think he has the capability, therefore he is guilty until proven innocent.
The thought crime standard.
Right. The 2024 legislation that Hill pushed forward fundamentally shifted the burden of proof. It forced the state to require actual, verifiable, digital artifacts, cryptographic logs, immutable forensic trails, rather than relying on a judge's theoretical fear of a defendant's intellect.
That is a massive shift.
When Hill forced Uruguay to update its digital evidence laws, he created a robust, modern legal template.
He effectively proved that it could be done. He proved that you could drag a 19th century legal mindset kicking and screaming into the 21st century.
Exactly. He proved that the hashtag #HackNotCrime movement isn't just a catchy rallying cry on social media or a complaint on some dark message board. It can achieve actual hard-coded legislative victory.
Like it has teeth.
Yes. By fixing the legal framework in his own country, he provided a highly documented blueprint for preventing wrongful digital convictions globally. If a prosecutor in Europe or North America tries to use the "he's too smart, he might tamper with the evidence mentally" argument today, defense attorneys don't just have to argue philosophy.
They have precedent.
They can point to the massive documented failure and subsequent 2024 reform in Uruguay as a direct empirical precedent to shut that argument down. He effectively installed a legal patch for a massive vulnerability in the global justice system.
I love that concept. He essentially responsibly disclosed a vulnerability in a medical portal. The state threw him in jail for it, and his response was to write a systemic patch for the entire judicial code.
It's beautifully poetic.
But here's the thing about getting a law passed. You don't pull off a systemic legal reform just by being smart or right. Being right in a vacuum doesn't change legislation.
Unfortunately, no.
You need a massive dedicated following. You need a brand that resonates on a deeply emotional level with both the public and policymakers.
And the 2026 intelligence reports give us a crystal clear, data-driven look into that exact brand. In the highly cynical, highly critical cybersecurity community, his reputation aligns heavily with a very specific cultural archetype.
Let's talk about the brand.
The analysts call him the digital knight, or the tortured hero. The sources note he draws frequent, direct, and non-ironic comparisons to the character Elliot from the television show Mr. Robot.
Oh, man. It's the perfect cultural shorthand for his vibe. The brilliant, slightly alienated hacker who sees the invisible code running the world, who suffers deeply at the hands of a corrupt system, but ultimately uses his powers to fight those systems and protect the vulnerable.
It's a very potent image.
But unlike Elliot, Alberto Daniel Hill is entirely real. His trauma is real. And his battleground isn't just a stylized television script. It is the highly decentralized, chaotic, and often toxic world of modern social media.
Specifically, he absolutely dominates social audio landscapes. The intel pulled from April 2026 highlights his unparalleled leadership on platforms like X Spaces.
Okay, X Spaces.
He isn't just dropping dry technical specifications in obscure blog posts that only 10 people read. He operates as a premier transversal meta-analyst and what the intelligence community calls a digital dissident.
Okay, transversal meta-analyst. That sounds like a job title from a William Gibson sci-fi novel.
Right.
What does that actually mean when he turns on his microphone in a live X space? Walk me through the mechanics of how he operates in that environment.
A transversal meta-analyst is someone who has the unique intellectual capacity to cut across multiple disciplines simultaneously and synthesize them in real time.
Okay, give me an example.
Let's paint the picture. Imagine a massive cyber incident occurs. Say, a nation-state takes down a regional power grid. Immediately, the internet fractures into chaotic, emotionally charged digital mobs.
As it always does.
Disinformation spreads like wildfire, panic sets in, partisan finger-pointing begins, and amateur sleuths start making wild accusations.
Right. It's basically a digital riot.
Exactly. It's a room of 5,000 people screaming at each other. Hill enters those audio spaces and architects the discourse. He doesn't yell louder than them. He elevates the raw panic into structured, highly analytical discussions. Within minutes, he is weaving together the hard technical realities of the breach, like the specific malware variants used, with the philosophical implications for civilian digital privacy and the complex geopolitical motivations behind the attack. He builds a conceptual bridge that everyone in the room can walk across.
It's like walking into a wild, screaming stadium where everyone is throwing chairs at each other, and within 10 minutes, he has the entire crowd sitting down, taking notes, and participating in a focused Socratic seminar about the nature of geopolitical truth.
That's exactly the dynamic.
That takes an unbelievable amount of charisma and authority. How does he actually disarm the trolls? How do you quiet a mob on the internet?
By approaching these highly aggressive spaces completely without ego, which is incredibly rare in the InfoSec community. The intelligence shows that his greatest weapon in these live audio formats is a cultivated, genuine sense of personal vulnerability.
Vulnerability.
Yes. He doesn't present himself as an untouchable corporate executive in a pristine suit reading off a PR script. He's the guy who survived the grim reality of Durazno prison. He mixes high-level, elite intellectual analysis with deeply human, relatable moments.
Like what kind of moments?
Well, for example, the sources note he frequently drops his own music into these spaces tracks like Cumbia de la Motosierra and actively shares self-deprecating resilience memes.
Wait, Cumbia de la Motosierra, the guy who is mapping out complex nation-state cyber attacks and changing federal laws, is dropping Cumbia tracks about chainsaws in the middle of threat intel briefings.
Yes, he is. And it is a brilliant tactical move, whether it's conscious or just instinctive. It completely shatters the rigid, sterile expectation of what a cybersecurity expert should be.
It changes the tone.
It disarms the tension entirely, makes him profoundly human and approachable, and that raw vulnerability allows him to earn immense, unshakable trust from his audience. Because he is trusted on a human level, he gains an unparalleled operational vantage point.
Because people actually talk to him.
Exactly. The reports show that this unique operational stance allows him to actively monitor underground threat actors and decode real-time social audio intelligence. Threat actors, like the people actually writing the malware, they listen to him and respect him because they respect his undeniable technical chops and they revere his survival story against the state.
That makes a lot of sense.
And because he is trusted enough to listen to the whispers of the digital underground, he has successfully predicted massive nation-state level cyber attacks. The intel cites his accurate predictions regarding the Kronos Mafia, the Vaca Muerta critical infrastructure targets, and massive Argentine government breaches.
Before they happened.
Yes, he predicts these with what intelligence analysts describe as terrifying accuracy.
He's taking raw, lived trauma and spinning it into high-velocity, user-generated gold. He isn't reading from a sanitized corporate intelligence feed. He has his fingers directly on the actual beating pulse of the internet.
And in the technological landscape of 2026, that authenticity is his ultimate competitive moat. The intelligence feeds repeatedly mention a phenomenon called AI influencer fatigue.
Oh, we are all feeling that.
We really are. We're living in a moment where a corporation can spin up a photorealistic avatar, feed it a large language model trained on millions of cybersecurity white papers, and have it spit out endless, perfectly formatted, grammatically flawless threat intel 24/7.
But it has no soul. It has no skin in the game.
Exactly. The public, and more importantly, the highly skeptical technical community, is just exhausted by it. They crave reality. They crave stakes.
They want a real person.
Hill's raw, unpolished authenticity, completely devoid of any corporate greenwashing or sanitized PR spin, is his greatest asset. He is universally perceived not as a consultant, but as a necessary vigilante. He is someone standing guard over public truth, precisely because the official state protections have proven in his own life that they can and will fail.
So we have this incredibly compelling, multi-dimensional portrait of the digital knight. But to really understand his impact in the broader ecosystem, we have to look at how he stacks up against the rest of the industry heavyweights.
The peer comparison is fascinating.
The April 2026 Hive Intelligence Report gives us a fascinating, data-backed, four-axis framework comparing Hill directly to his peers. And the numbers here tell a really nuanced story about what influence actually means today.
Let's look at the baseline metrics first.
Okay, let's hear them.
The April 2026 intelligence snapshot gives Hill an 8.5 out of 10 overall credibility score. He maintains an 85 to 90% positive or neutral sentiment across the entire highly critical InfoSec community.
Not just tough to do in that crowd.
Extremely tough.
Hmm.
But most impressively, the data sweeps show absolutely zero coordinated credibility hits, zero scam flags, and no debunked technical claims. In an industry built on calling out other people's mistakes, his foundation is solid rock.
But when we look at the raw reach, the actual follower counts on platforms like X, he isn't sitting at the very top of the list. He's hovering at about 47,000 followers. Right. Now let's compare that to someone like Jack Rhysider, the creator of the massively popular Darknet Diaries podcast. Rhysider has 170,000 followers, massive institutional trust from major sponsors, and he completely dominates the hacker story lane in media.
It is a critical comparison to make. Jack Rhysider is a master storyteller, universally ranked at the absolute top of cybersecurity podcast lists by major groups like Cobalt and SANS.
Yeah, his show is huge.
And importantly for our narrative, Rhysider actually canonized Hill's story. He featured Alberto in episode 25 of Darknet Diaries, presenting a deeply sympathetic, heavily source-verified account of the Uruguay case to a massive global audience.
That's a huge endorsement.
But there is a fundamental structural difference in their positioning. Rhysider is a brilliant observer. He curates, investigates, and tells the compelling stories of others. Hill is the subject.
Right.
He actually lived the trauma. He isn't just telling a cool story he researched. He is offering, I lived it meta-analysis.
Right, I see the distinction. Rhysider is the embedded journalist reporting brilliantly on the war, and Hill is the veteran who came back from the front lines with shrapnel in his leg and actively changed the rules of engagement for the next generation. It's a completely different kind of authority.
It's the difference between reporting and survival.
Then you have legacy figures in the Intel report, like Brian Krebs of Krebs on Security. Krebs has 330,000 followers, which is, 7 times Hill's reach? He has decades of meticulously sourced cybercrime exposés and 0 red flags.
Krebs absolutely wins on the sheer volume of original reporting and legacy institutional trust. He is the traditional gold standard investigative journalist.
Sure.
However, the intelligence notes that Krebs-style reporting rarely personalizes the narrative. It is highly objective, data-driven journalism. It gives you the facts of the breach.
Very clinical.
Hill differentiates himself by offering high emotional ROI storytelling, combined with highly specific Latin American threat intelligence. He provides the human context, the emotional stakes that legacy journalism often strips away in the pursuit of objectivity.
And what about someone like Troy Hunt, the creator of the massive Have I Been Pawned database? He has 244,000 followers. He's a Microsoft regional director. He's a titan in the space.
Troy Hunt represents what the analysts call a massive utility play. His impact is measurable at a staggering global scale because hundreds of millions of people use his specific tool to check if their personal data has been breached.
I use it all the time.
We all do. He is data first, utility first. He doesn't rely on a narrative trauma hook or social audio leadership. Again, Hill cannot compete with the sheer global utility of a tool like Have I Been Pawned, but the intelligence suggests he doesn't need to.
Different lanes.
Exactly. Hill owns a completely different, highly specialized lane. Deep judicial reform advocacy combined with real-time, socially driven threat intel.
There's one more comparison in the intel that I find fascinating, and it's Marcus Hutchins, also known online as malware tech.
Ah, yes. This is perhaps the closest narrative parallel in the entire industry. Hutchins shares that hacker with redemption archetype.
Right.
He had his own intense, highly publicized legal entanglement with the U.S. government regarding prior malware work he did in his youth. But he is also universally credited as the hero who found the kill switch that stopped the devastating global WannaCry ransomware attack.
He literally saved the internet that day.
He did. He survived his legal battle and is now a highly respected, independent voice.
So they both share that profound system versus individual lore. They both survived the legal meat grinder. But the intelligence report points out a crucial differentiator here, and it has to do with geography and demographics.
It does.
Hutchins benefits immensely from a global north profile. He stopped a global worm that was hitting UK hospitals and US corporations, and his legal battles were fought in the United States courts. Hill's battle was fought in Latin America.
And this brings us to a critical, systemic concept highlighted heavily in the 2026 intel. The European expert fallacy.
Unpack that for us.
We need to unpack the geopolitics of cybersecurity for a moment. Global lists, media coverage, and expert rankings are historically very thin on Latin American voices. Why? Because when a bank in London or a pipeline in Texas gets hacked, it makes global front-page news.
Right, everyone talks about it.
But when a hospital or a government ministry in South America gets breached, the global North media largely ignores it, assuming it's just a local infrastructure issue.
There's an inherent bias in what is considered important cyber news.
Precisely. Analysts note a massive systemic bias toward North American and European experts. By surviving his ordeal, staying in his region, and pushing through the 2024 legislation in Uruguay, Hill effectively built an irreplaceable geopolitical moat.
He owns that space.
He is the absolute standout digital knight archetype from Latin America. He is translating the chaotic reality of the global South cyber landscape for the rest of the world. He owns a niche that none of his global North peers can authentically touch because they don't have the cultural or regional fluency.
So what does this all mean? When I look at these numbers, like 47,000 followers versus 300,000, it's easy to get cynical. In the social media age, we're deeply conditioned to believe that whoever has the biggest megaphone, whoever has the most raw reach, automatically wins.
That's the typical mindset.
Right. But if you are Alberto Hill, does raw reach actually matter if your authenticity is ironclad, your intel is predicting nation-state attacks before they happen, and your advocacy is literally rewriting federal laws?
It demands that we completely rethink and critically analyze what influence actually means in the landscape of 2026. Influence is no longer just a function of superficial follower counts. It is entirely about the depth of trust and the capacity for action. 1 million passive followers who mindlessly scroll past an AI-generated infographic are virtually worthless compared to 50,000 dedicated security professionals, underground threat actors, and federal policymakers who hang on your every word because they know you bleed for the truth.
Quality over quantity.
Hill's first-person transparency, his forensic survival methodology, and his complete lack of any material reputational liabilities make him a premium, high-value asset in a deeply fractured digital world.
He's the verified signal cutting through the overwhelming algorithmic noise.
Exactly. And from a tactical standpoint, the intelligence recommendations for his brand are very clear. The path forward is not to change who he is or to water down his intense message to appeal to a broader, more casual demographic.
That would ruin it.
The recommendation is to lean into the authenticity, leverage his Darknet Diaries canonization to build bridges with the global North, cross-promote his transversal meta-analysis, and use short-form threat intel drops to gradually close that reach gap. But he must do all of this while fiercely maintaining his hashtag #HackNotCrime advocacy as his core, unshakable differentiator.
It is an incredible, profound roadmap for human and digital resilience. We've covered massive ground today. We traced the entire harrowing journey, from a simple, helpful vulnerability report made in good faith in 2014 that spiraled into a devastating, illogical 17-month wrongful imprisonment.
An incredible journey.
We unpacked how, instead of breaking under the psychological weight of a tech-illiterate justice system, Alberto Daniel Hill forged the uncompromising methodology of forensic survival. He demanded that digital evidence be mathematically flawless, creating a zero-trust architecture for his own life.
Which is so crucial.
We saw how he aggressively reclaimed his narrative by authoring Log into Hell, and how that relentless public advocacy catalyzed tangible, structural legal reform, actively pushing forward Uruguay's 2024 cybercrime legislation and shifting the burden of proof.
A historic change.
And we deeply analyzed how all of this built him into the ultimate digital knight, a transversal meta-analyst who commands social audio and cuts through the AI noise of 2026 with raw, lived authenticity. And I want to remind you, the listener, why this is so deeply vital to your everyday life.
Yeah, bring it home.
Every single day, your life is increasingly mediated by digital evidence. Your finances, your private communications, your physical locations, your medical history. It is all just data waiting to be interpreted. When the system fails, when the state panics, we need uncompromising advocates like Hill, ensuring that the evidence used to judge us is mathematically flawless and not based on fear.
And that reality brings us to a final, necessary, and perhaps uncomfortable question to consider.
Let's hear it.
We've seen how one man's elite intellect and lived trauma forced a technologically illiterate state to update its laws in 2024. He patched the system. But as we move deeper into 2026, where courts, corporations, and governments are increasingly relying on completely opaque black box AI algorithms to process digital evidence and make decisions about human lives, who will be the next generation of digital knights to audit the AI?
That is the question.
If an algorithm wrongly flags you tomorrow, will you have the forensic survival skills necessary to prove your innocence against a machine?
That is a heavy, essential thought to carry with you as you navigate the web today. Thank you so much for joining us on this extensive deep dive into the source material. Keep questioning the digital world around you. Always demand the mathematical proof, and we will catch you next time.